Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the i5-1240p processor sounded to me like an old laptop chip, one of those hyper-threaded dual cores found inside old notebooks. It was only when Beelink sent over their SEi12 mini PC that I realised it was a lot newer and more powerful than I first thought. With 4 performance cores, 8 efficient cores and 16 threads total, this mini machine packs quite the punch. It also features Iris Xe graphics, which I've wanted to check out for quite some time. Some CPU benchmarks first to give you an idea of the 1240p's power. I've included a couple of comparative desktop CPU results that I had to hand, just for the sake of a bit of context, and I found that when using this thing to render videos, for example, something I do a lot of, the result was very impressive, and on top of that, the system as a whole stayed very quiet. It barely hums at low load, and while it's certainly audible under stress, it really isn't that noisy at all. On to the performance of the Iris Xe graphics now, which will differ in capability depending on the system and CPU they are a part of. Inside the SEi12, the Iris Xe graphics are paired with 16 gigs of 4800MHz DDR5. That's two 8GB modules. The Beelink SEi12 also has a 500GB PCIe 4.0 M2 NVMe SSD, which is very welcome, and thankfully the additional 2.5-inch hard drive bay meant I could add my old school SSD to it to test out even more titles. I think that the main appeal of this compact computer is that speedy i5 processor. If you want something that can edit video and you are limited on space, this could be a good choice. Going into the gaming tests on the other hand, and I wasn't really expecting much at all, given that Intel's onboard graphics are often lacking in comparison to AMD's offerings on both the desktop and mobile side of things. That said, taking a break from any editing or everyday work to play some games isn't impossible by any means. The first game I tested was Apex Legends. Now, as you can imagine, we are limited to 720 or 900p, really, if we want to achieve 60 FPS or close to it, but that's not to say that 1080p still isn't doable, providing you have a 30 FPS target in mind for a lot of titles. In Apex Legends then, with the very low textures, TSAA and everything else at its respective lowest, we were able to hit 60 FPS at 1280 by 720 with fairly solid 1 and 0.1% lows as well. In Fallout 4 at 720p medium once again we saw 65 FPS after uncapping the frame rate. The 1% low was also pretty good, but there were a few dips and drops here and there. You can also play Fallout 4 at 1080p with at least 30 FPS, though areas like Diamond City and Concord will cause a few more problems, so I think once again sticking to those lower resolutions is better for the 1240p. It's exciting to see what Intel are doing with their integrated or onboard graphics. They've definitely come a long way, even if they're not quite up to par of their competitors yet, but you know, the more we have on the market that is capable of gaming without a discrete graphics card, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Forza Horizon 5 at 720p with the low preset, not very low, just the low preset, and TAA gave us 45 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 26 and a 0.1% low of 14. Now this frame rate will drop a little bit more during multi-competitor races, but overall it will definitely stick above 30 for most of the time. The game doesn't look too bad with the low preset. It's only when we go to very low that the shadows and stuff disappear, so it looks like an entirely different title. So I recommend sticking with low if you can. In GTA 5, we turned the detail sliders up halfway, enabled FXAA, and then set everything else to its respective lowest, which in this game is pretty much normal settings. We were actually able to hit 60 FPS here at 1080p with solid percentile figures as well. This is of course an older game, but it's still very much relevant in my opinion, and it's nice to see a mobile Intel processor and onboard graphics hitting that 60 FPS threshold. This is something we could have only dreamed of a few years ago. In Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, I really knew that I was pushing this thing here, but somehow we still hit over 30 FPS. Now this game does have FSR, and you can enable Ultra Performance FSR at 1080p for a very similar result, but I found that the game looked slightly better and performed a little bit better as well with native 1280 by 720 and the lowest settings. Somehow we were able to hit at least 30 FPS here with the Iris graphics, but there were a few problems as far as the percentile lows were concerned. This is something I expected. In Red Dead Redemption 2, again at 720p with the ultra textures, medium TAA and everything else at its respective lowest, we got a pretty surprising result of 41 FPS. Now I reckon if you were to go with 1080p you'd be seeing just under 30, but here the 1 and 0.1% lows were also pretty solid, meaning that when the game does drop, it doesn't drop very much, and even in those busier town areas you're still going to see a pretty solid frame rate. I think if you have one of these Beelink systems on your desk and you just want to take a break from work or something and fire up a couple of games, you can do so without worrying too much, and providing you don't mind sacrificing some of the visual fidelity. Now in Fortnite, I think this had to be a driver issue or something, because even at 720p with the performance mode, low textures and the epic view distance, we were only seeing 50 FPS with some pretty horrible percentile lows. Now this isn't what I expected to see at all. Again, I think there are probably some driver issues at play here, because we should definitely be seeing at least 60 FPS with this setup. So I can't say for sure that it is a driver problem, but I think that seems very likely considering the performance I'm seeing, and when we take into consideration the performance of other games as well. So this is one to keep an eye on. I'll be monitoring this performance to see how it changes in the future. Now, Cyberpunk 2077, this was another one that I thought no chance, but at 1080p with FSR 2.1 set to ultra performance and the settings set to their respective lowest, we did hit at least 30 FPS. Now 720p once again delivered a very similar performance, but I think this time around 1080p with FSR 2.1 just about outdid it, and the game looked slightly better for it here, unlike in Spider-Man. The 1% low was okay, the 0.1% low was okay, and there weren't too many big dips or drops here and there. Finally then we have CSGO. I could have probably selected a lower resolution, but 1080p with the lowest settings, and we saw over 100 FPS with a few little dips and drops, which isn't unexpected given that I've seen this plenty of times on various hardware setups with CSGO. I was able to remain competitive, get a few kills in, but just bear in mind that there may be a few little drops here and there when playing online with other players, of course. I think it's a decent effort though, especially when you go into something expecting nothing, so yeah, pretty okay overall for the Iris Xe graphics today. The i5 1240p is definitely more appealing from the perspective of CPU power, but the onboard graphics can still play games, albeit with reduced settings. I'm starting to see a lot of laptops with this processor, as well as some other mini PCs and all-in-one desktops, albeit with higher price tags than the SEi12 here. I like the sturdy metal design of this thing, and the dark blue finish is certainly on brand, as it is an Intel based machine after all. As always, these Beelink systems continue to fascinate me and surprise me with how much power can be stuffed into a small enclosure. The combination of the i5 and Iris Xe graphics is one that is better suited to CPU intensive tasks, but gaming is doable with some sacrifices. I wouldn't exactly call this a gaming machine, but it is nice to finally check out what the Iris Xe graphics can do, and I'll be looking forward to seeing what other machines featuring similar hardware can do in the future as well. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.